I feel like when we're giving money to the police and prisons, we are giving money to white supremacy. It's like the easiest way I feel like I have related to the PIC. When people who look like you, people who look like the people you care about are constantly being murdered, harmed, or mistreated by the police in every news story, like every single one, when the statistics back that up as well, it becomes very clear that prisons and police are not something we're giving money to perpetuate this whole idea of safety. That's not what it's doing in any shape, form, or fashion. I think it's just giving money to rich people, giving money to white people. I think it's giving money to the status quo. I think it's keeping things as they are. I think we have not at all moved away from the roots of slavery in this country. And so every time we cage people away who are Black and brown, we're just continuing all of that legacy, and we haven't done a single thing to get away from it at all.
Sure. So my name is Jamal, and I've lived in Atlanta for the past 5 years. I've also a part of a community-based organization called Community Movement Builders, which is a place-based organization based off of building Black self-sufficient communities. And we're based out of the Pittsburgh neighborhood in Atlanta.
Sure. My name's DARCI Jarrett. I guess I've lived in Atlanta for almost 20 years now. And I'm a community member, a pastor, a parent with a kid who used to go to, pre-pandemic, went to school in the city. And my wife grew up here, and
I am LEJOI Lane, and my connection to Atlanta is that I grew up in the West End. So from about 5 until I was 22, that was the area that groomed me, raised me, and contributed to the person I am today. So one of the main things and why I mentioned community as being my connection to Atlanta is I've seen a lot of the older people that I've grown up with on my street that were pivotal to creating who I am today lose their house. So I've seen houses that were across the street from mine completely debilitated and then being bought out by investors and then not being able to be sold or even offered to the families that once lived there. And it's a very harsh reality. And not only that, I've seen it with multiple houses on one street. So you think maybe it's a one-off thing, like this just unfortunately happened to one family. It's on a house, on a street with, let's say, 12 houses. I would probably say 10 of them are now either debilitated or being offered up to investors. And these are the same investors that come into the neighborhood and completely disregard the people that were there, the culture that was there. And unfortunately, it seems that the banks, and I wouldn't even say seems, it's actually proven now that as Black people, especially older Black people and the children that come behind them, they aren't even being offered the loans to get the houses. So it's this really vicious cycle of, I would say, an intentional effort to take neighborhoods.
I live in Pittsburgh, and to be honest, like, we see so much gentrification in the community right now, right? I was looking at some of the numbers, and just between 2015 and 2020, property taxes have risen from $400 a year to $2,000 a year, right? And with increasing property taxes, that means that rent increases. That means that even mortgages increases. People do have mortgages in the community. We've had a few different programs run, and people are hurting from it, right? We have a stabilization fund where we're providing funds for grant, mortgage, utility bill assistance. And just in the past year, we've assisted over 60 people, 60 families, 60 households from that. And that's just within the Pittsburgh neighborhood, which is relatively small. So that's a very large number of people that just haven't been able to make the rent because of the gentrification, right? At the same time, we also have been getting petition signatures as well. And we've gotten over 400 signatures that wanted to slow down this gentrification in the community. And, you know, that's again, just within the neighborhood of Pittsburgh. So that's a really big issue that we haven't seen a lot of support from city council. We haven't seen support from neighborhood association folks either. And, you know, we're trying to, you know, fight this battle and, you know, make sure that people are able to stay in their homes.
If you get on these like neighborhood threads, whatever it is on Facebook or Nextdoor, you just hear a lot of folks that think when they purchased a house in Atlanta, they purchased the whole street and the sidewalk and they purchased the ability to police who walks up and down their street. And so there's this real dependence on policing by white people. And I say that it's not just white people, I think, but it's folks that are kind of moving in with this assumption of ownership and I would say like a colonizer mentality. And so as a person who's lived here for a minute, I always knew that Atlanta, that I was like a guest in Atlanta, you know, that it's the blackest city in the country, that it's the, you know, queerest city in the country. That's why I moved here. But that it wasn't mine, that I needed to tread lightly.
I think history proves itself. Giving more money to the police has not solved the problem. I mean, if that was the answer, I think we would be past this a long, long time ago, consider how hefty their budgets are. Body cams and quote unquote ethical training has proven to be a wasted money.
We have seen where that money goes, right? We have seen over-policing in Black communities here in Atlanta. We have, you know, Black people in Atlanta are not safe, right? And when I say we're not safe, I'm talking about specifically about police brutality. We've seen so many Black people being killed by the police officers just in the past 3 years, right?
In this city, there's this connection between the militarization of police and the training of police by foreign national military. And so if we think about it, a 10% increase in policing, when in this city, we have seen how many police there are. We've literally seen them in the streets because just less than 2 miles from here, Rayshard Brooks was killed. And the police presence in those moments right afterward was extreme. So even if I didn't know the numbers, I could say, wow, there's a lot of police in Atlanta. And they have the fastest, best cars. They have all the gear. And so, yeah, I don't support an increase in police budget because, you know, well, I don't support an increase in police budget because I don't support policing, but also because even if they just moved ahead how they are, they're extremely well funded.
We think America is the model for everything, and it's not true. If you look at so many other countries that don't have the same type of police funding that we have, they're doing much better in their incarceration rates. They're doing much better in their violence. So I think it's time that we move past this model of police are our authority and the only way we control people to options that include, okay, well, what does rehabilitation look like? What is having resources that are preventative measures before we get to the point where we're saying we need to incarcerate people or we need to lay down the law, so to say.
I mean, homelessness is an issue that I myself have dealt with here in Atlanta now about 10 years ago. But it's increasing as an issue. So when it comes to places that do provide shelter, I think we need way more funding for those places. So I'm the pastor here at Park Avenue Baptist Church, and Lost and Found Youth, which is a shelter dedicated to young folks. It's not exclusively queer folks, but it is oriented towards folks like us, and they need more funding. So yeah, I think homelessness for me is like a big one. I think the Policing Alternatives 311, mental health crises, agencies could be exponentially increased, and that would really help people. I do live with mental illness, and so I can see that and see that it's someone going through something, not someone who's dangerous.
Why would we want to increase police budget when the police budget is going to brutalize our bodies, as opposed to actually just providing people with their basic needs, right? Food, water, shelter. Amidst the gentrification, amidst COVID-19, our communities were not seeing that. Our communities were seeing our communities were, being further gentrified out the communities. A lot of people losing their homes, a lot of people getting evicted, and then a lot of people just not having food or ability to sustain themselves. So instead of being able to put money towards police, which we see are only there to be able to, brutalize us even further, we should be having these programs funded so that our communities can be sustainable, and investing in community-based organizations that can be able to create community-based institutions that can provide the basic needs for our people.
I'm Aaron Thorpe. My connection to Atlanta is I moved here about 7 years ago after my parents had already been here for like a couple years. And I didn't like it at first, not gonna lie. I mean, New York is like, the city that never sleeps, but all my friends, family were there, and eventually came to love it. The people, the fact that like there's fresh air, there are green things, and I like it now that I'm living here, and I'm trying to, do good work in the city of Atlanta, especially. So.
My name is CHANNA Childs, and I moved to Atlanta about 2 years ago after graduating to work with an environmental group, and I'll be starting as a law student at GSU in the fall.
Who am I? That was very dramatic for no reason. That's what I am to the city of Atlanta. Very dramatic for no reason. My name is Daniel James Gilstrap. I'm a third-generation African-American man in Atlanta. Both my father and grandfather were born and raised in Atlanta. Ultimately, I'm a third-generation Gilstrap, which means that I'm a prominent member of my church community, the Methodist community in Southwest Atlanta, and that has very much shaped my views of the city and how we are allowed to navigate it.
I think a lot of people assume that like the South is like this backwards, really ignorant region of the country without understanding how a history of racial capitalism, and just the emaciation of public services have led to this point where we are now, So that's kind of what I want to do, like highlight that if the revolution starts anywhere, it's going to start in the South, In Southwest Atlanta, I used to date someone that lived there, and I mean, the houses were all like boarded up or shuttered, like on most blocks, but there was also like heavy police presence, raids, just people being harassed by the police. And it just really, in my mind, it was a stark realization that the police really are like an invading army, and they have the right to do whatever they want. And people who live in communities don't have a say, right? And they're constantly being harassed and terrorized. And that's just something that, I would witness, not just in Southwest Atlanta, but even in a neighborhood like this.
Atlanta has a lot of like politics that ultimately like overcome the needs and wants of the people, it feels like a lot of the times. Like community needs and things that would maybe help progress for like my friends that are starting to have families, or like myself with just trying to get from point A to point B in the city. Like a lot of those decisions aren't made in consideration towards the people, and they're made to consideration towards like what feels like people outside of Atlanta making a profit. A great example is the fact that although MARAGH is for Atlanta, it is not owned by anyone in Atlanta. And thus, they don't have to be accountable for their crappy services, and I still use their crappy services. Why? Because I'm poor! And they did not do enough of a foundational work to make sure that the people had the right tools to like sustain themselves and ultimately grow and develop.
I think a big issue with the city is a lot of our environmental concerns, our environmental justice concerns, particularly the fact of people having high energy bills, which is not good for the planet, obviously, and not good for the people who live here. Atlanta needs to move towards a clean energy future, which is something that the city has dabbled in talking about moving forward on, but every time they go to the table to meet with environmental groups, they're not following through, and that could definitely be a higher priority since that's a human rights issue for elderly people, low-income people, all sorts of different demographics of people, particularly minorities are totally disproportionately affected by our inability to commit to really putting emphasis on people having clean energy.
My biggest qualm, and one of the things I truly hate the police and the news for, is how they are criminalizing all of the children of Atlanta, especially Black children in Atlanta. My number one thought I've had as an adult in the last 2 years is how we need to rewatch all of those silly Step Up movies and dance movies and things like that. Because you know what exists in that whole fantasy that doesn't exist in real life? Places for young adults to go and for children to go. If I think about my life in Atlanta, I was bulldozed into being an adult from a young age, mostly because outlets for being the child I wanted to be didn't exist. I wanted to be an artsy child, I wanted to be a sensitive child, and I wanted to talk about my feelings. My parents wanted me to play sports because I have a good body for it. I never got the opportunity to have the childhood I truly wanted. I always had to negotiate for it, and I don't want children under me to have to do that with their lifetimes. And this is a great place to not have to do that if we can stop giving up so much of what makes Atlanta great.
I just got in a car accident, right, a couple days ago, and it really struck me that if public transit was invested in and funded, then, or at least roads and bridges were repaired, then I wouldn't have to drive a car and be stuck in traffic, 2 ways coming from Lithonia to here and back. And I think public transit is something that that money that they're using for the police budget, you could use it for that.
Yeah, that's absolutely not our budget because it fundamentally misunderstands the role that police have played in our city, the role that the PIC has played in people's lives, and how all of it contributes to making us a less safe Atlanta that keeps people from having connections with relatives and folks they talk to. I have a pen pal who's been in prison for many, many years, and just listening to so many of his connections with people in his community being eroded by this system, we shouldn't be giving that a single more dollar. Instead, we should be focusing on how people like my pen pal would like to start a business and would like to do things to contribute to the city, but instead they're being held back based on mistakes they made when they were children. It's also not my budget because I think our city is uniquely positioned to be a leader in moving forward and teaching people how to have a better community, a better world, and we don't need to be dependent on things that are draining resources from what we should be focused on.
One thing that really kind of blew my mind here is that, yeah, sure, in New York, you'll see people panhandling, you'll see unhoused people all the time, but here it's maybe because it's a smaller city, it's something that I see more often. I also do know that Atlanta has one of the highest wealth and income inequality gaps in the country. And just, build housing for people, I think since the 96 Olympics, all of that public housing was torn down. I think that APD has even said that if you are going to feed unhoused people, that you can be ticketed and fined for that, because what they would rather, frankly, is just for these people to die, right? So public transit, funding social services like that, I think that's how you show, your city that you care about them, not just for the people that, participate electorally or in the economy, but the people that are kind of unseen, but are constantly out in the streets, So that's something that I think the budget should consider instead of giving more money to cops.
I mean, everything should just be funded more. Like I said, I'll be a student in the fall, so just thinking about how crazy those prices are, how it bars a lot of people from even be able to consider higher education opportunities. We should just be funding all the things that people want to get involved in to make Atlanta a better city. Instead, we're wasting our time on all these other things and criminalizing people versus investing in their futures, allowing them to build community resources, giving people what they need to succeed is more important to me.
Okay, well, I'm MARAGH Gerben. I'm 27. I've lived here my whole life. Grew up in Midtown, also in East Point, between those two areas. I've gone to college here, went to Georgia Tech, went to Georgia State, and I want to spend most of my life living here if I can.
My name is Pastor Henry Chenault. I've been a pastor at Park Avenue Baptist Church here in Grant Park for the last going on 12 years. Not only have I been a pastor in the city of Atlanta, I work with Boy Scouts in their outreach program, going throughout the city and urban city for 5 years, creating Boy Scout programs in poverty-stricken schools and elementary schools and high schools. So for years I mentored young men in the city of Atlanta, taking them out of the city of Atlanta into the woods. So I did that for a long time. I'm a parent. My kids obviously are raised here in Atlanta, Metro Atlanta, along with my wife. And just I've always been in this space, a space where we all try to communicate about justice and loving all of God's people.
My name is Grace Kim. I am a consultant working in community development, the arts, economic development, and community activism. I grew up here. I'm from Atlanta, from the suburbs, and I've lived in town for 11 years in the neighborhood of Ormwood Park.
Okay, my name is KENDALL. I was born and raised here in Atlanta, Southwest Atlanta to be specific, and I work here. I work in East Point as a paralegal. I also have a media outlet called Atlanta Decoded.
I mean, I've definitely seen just in the last 5 to 10 years, like in my own coming into adulthood, seen the demographics of the city change greatly. And I think that's not necessarily all bad. I do like a lot of the development that's happening, certain places where you wouldn't really be caught dead just walking around before you can now, just even Edgewood. And so I like that, but it comes at a cost of the people who actually want to live in those spaces not being able to live there. I don't know if I could afford to live in Midtown, even though that's my favorite place in Atlanta. It's disappointing that you grow up in a space and then all of a sudden you can't even afford to be there when you've already invested so much and that space has already invested so much in you.
And just me personally, I have a lot of young men who are in prison for a long time. A lot of my boys have done well that I've mentored, but a lot of them are in prison for a long time, and I see the effect that it's having on their life. Young men going in jail for 10, 15 years, coming out, and they're not going to be able to assimilate themselves back in society in a way. Society, on the back end of that, society doesn't accept. We don't have a process to accept them back that's meaningful. And just every week, I talk to 2 or 3 boys that are in prison. They call me every week. And just to listen to them, what they're going through, and how they're trying to survive, it affects me. It keeps it on the forefront of my mind.
I'm recently moved back to the city, been back for about a year, and just one of the biggest things I would say that has jumped out at me is homelessness, just the unsheltered population in general, and the way they're treated. And then another issue I would say is the way that we treat the formerly incarcerated, and how difficult it is to kind of come back out and get your life back on track after you serve time. Just access to jobs, access to help in general, access to childcare and career education. And education is a challenge already. These are things that are already difficult for people who come from a non-incarcerated background, so it's only more difficult for people who have been locked up.
So I grew up in the suburbs of Atlanta here, and as an immigrant's child, a Korean American, first generation Korean American, there is this, bias and expectation even of being a model minority. And part of that is this sort of unspoken contract about the police being on your side and that they're actually keeping you secure. But, growing up in the suburbs, and even now as I live in a very well invested in community, relatively in town Atlanta, there's really no police presence, not in the way that I've come to know that the communities, especially communities of color and lower income communities, experience in Atlanta. With this, of course, past year, but my work as I've seen it, that illusion that I grew up with has been completely exploded. And it's probably a good thing, because the reality is anyone who experiences that kind of fear, violence, intimidation, and just lack of true support and security, that is not the kind of experience that any of us should be experiencing through our public safety officers or staff or support.
I think it feels like putting a Band-Aid on a problem and not really getting to the root cause. So I know that, especially through COVID in the last several months, we've had a huge increase in violence and killings and stuff like that. And, that disappoints me as much as it disappoints the next person. But I feel like when they're just trying to raise the budget and bring in more police to those areas, they're not actually getting to the reason why this violence has gone up, which is mostly in part of the economic impact of COVID and the lockdowns and people not getting the support they need. And so, mental health declines, people's money and savings, if they even had any at all, is probably gone. And people are hurting. And even though, vaccines are rolling out and stuff, it's not enough. It feels like just throwing money at a problem to the area that actually ends up doing the least to solve the problem.
I don't support it because I personally don't feel like the police solve issues and solve crime even in general. And I don't think locking everyone up is the answer either. And I feel like the Atlanta activist community has made that clear, especially over the past year, over the past 12 months with all the events that have happened. And it just kind of feels like at this point, we're being ignored. They're being ignored. And I think research has shown that providing people with services to actually improve their lives is a much better deterrent of crime than the police and locking people up. But it seems like the leadership here in Atlanta has the complete opposite opinion. And I hate it.
It destroys families, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it breaks up families. It destroys your community. When you take people out of the community that can add value, it lessens creativity. It's just not good for the community at all to have so many people incarcerated and then not have a way to, put them back in society and be welcome home. As a human being, as a person living and breathing, who have rights just like we do. May have made a mistake, but that mistake shouldn't, be a stamp on their head for the rest of their lives.
We have the most, inequitable, experience of income in the world, some of, compared to other cities. And we have the most income immobility. People who are born poor here just, are likely to die poor here. That's a travesty and a tragedy. And these are the kind of indicators we really should be looking at, because without those kind of investments and without that kind of hope, without those kind of opportunities, how do we expect that we're not going to have this vacuum of, crime and other kind of unlawful ways of addressing these kind of inequities?
One of my biggest concerns in the city is the food scarcity, especially in Black neighborhoods and in poor neighborhoods. It's irritating that Trader Joe's, which is actually very well-priced groceries, only exists in neighborhoods that can super afford it. It's only in Midtown in white, rich neighborhoods. And meanwhile, down in the south of Atlanta, we only have Walmart and Piggly Wiggly. There's not access to good, healthy things and easy foods. And so the health of our communities is such a big problem for me. And I think more money should go into bringing healthy, accessible food into those areas?
I would love to see the work that PAD Atlanta is doing, supported more financially. The staff, I think, can be increased, quadrupled. And I love the work that they're doing over there, just as far as de-escalating situations where a cop doesn't have to be involved. I think that's where public safety is heading, hopefully, in this country, and should be heading in this country. And I would love to see Atlanta on the forefront of that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would like to see more programs tailored toward communities of color that are more focused on education for STEM, things of that nature, science, technology. You know, all of us have a phone in our hand, and that's great, but how can we use that to better our society and the people that, you know, who are, I guess, less fortunate in that regard, on the margins of Atlanta? You know, I would really like to see, instead of putting money towards policemen and increasing that budget, put more towards education and kind of, you know, bridge this wealth gap. And I think it starts at home. It starts with education. It starts with access. Giving kids access to different parents and kids, different access to different avenues where they can see change. You know, when I was in the city of Atlanta, I had 12 young boys that I mentored. None of them have ever been outside of that one block, you know, for the first 10 years of their life. So that kind of, basically, you're in a cage. And if you don't see other things and you don't have access to other things, then how can you imagine beyond, you know, other than what you see on TV and on the streets? And what they see is sometimes not a pretty picture. So they don't have that ceiling. It basically places a ceiling on who they are and who they can be. So definitely programs where, you know, kids in the inner city can get to see different things, have access to different things that can really, you know, enrich their life in that regard.
The most helpful kind of intervention is actually on the front end of community investment, community engagement, relationships, and all the other preventative and proactive things that we could be doing to prevent the kind of escalations and challenges that most people are experiencing, or that create the circumstances for crime to happen. And we have an opportunity here, you know, to really address these things. That's the way I'd like to look at it. Yes, we have challenges, but right now is a crucial time to be investing in economic support, economic initiatives, and empowering our community members to have that kind of grassroots sort of growth and economic development. That's what we should be doing.